This happened last summer when I was staying at my cousin's beach house in the Outer Banks. I was going through a rough patch, just got out of a pretty messy breakup and needed to get away from everything for a while. My cousin Sarah was cool about letting me crash there for a week while she was traveling for work. The house sits right on the dunes, one of those classic beach rentals with weathered cedar shingles and a wraparound porch. During the day it's gorgeous, you can see the ocean from every window and hear the waves constantly rolling in. But at night, man, it gets creepy fast. The wind howls through the beach grass and the whole place creaks like it's about to fall apart. I'd been having these super vivid dreams since the breakup. Not nightmares exactly, but weird dreams where I'd be walking through empty rooms and houses I'd never seen before, always searching for something I couldn't name. Sometimes I'd find doors that led to other doors, or staircases that went nowhere. I'd wake up exhausted, like I'd actually been walking around all night. My third night there, I had the most intense dream yet. I was in this massive house with endless hallways and rooms that seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. But this time, I wasn't alone. There was this woman following me, not chasing, just following at a distance. She was wearing this old-fashioned white nightgown that looked like it was from the 1800s or something. Her hair was long and dark, and she never made any sound when she walked. Every time I turned around to look at her, she'd stop and just stare at me with these hollow, empty eyes. Then she'd tilt her head to the side like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. The weirdest part was that I could feel her watching me even when I wasn't looking back. You know that feeling when someone's staring at you? It was like that, but amplified times 10. I woke up around 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, heart pounding. The dream had felt so real that I actually checked the room to make sure I was alone. Everything seemed normal, so I grabbed some water and tried to shake it off. But as I was walking back to bed, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were wet footprints on the hardwood floor leading from the bathroom to the bedroom. Small, bare feet, definitely not mine. The prints were still damp, like whoever made them had just walked through. I'm not gonna lie, I freaked out. I checked every room, every closet, under the beds, nothing. All the doors and windows were locked from the inside. There was no way anyone could have gotten in. I convinced myself I must have dripped water when I got up, even though I knew that wasn't right. The next morning, I called Sarah to ask if she'd had any problems with break-ins or anything weird happening at the house. She laughed it off and said the only thing weird about that place was how the pipes made noise at night. But then she mentioned something that made my skin crawl. "Oh, and if you have any weird dreams, don't worry about it," she said casually. "Something about that house just gives people really vivid dreams." My mom always said it was because it's so close to the water. That night, I tried to stay awake as long as possible. I drank like 3 energy drinks and kept all the lights on, but eventually I crashed around 2 a.m. The dream started immediately. This time, I was in the beach house, but it wasn't quite right. The rooms were in different places, and there were hallways that shouldn't exist. The woman in white was there again, but now she was closer. She was standing at the foot of my bed, just watching me sleep in the dream. When I tried to move, I realized I was paralyzed. Not sleep paralysis, I've had that before. This was different. I could see and hear everything, but my body wouldn't respond. The woman started walking around the bed, her feet making no sound on the floor. She leaned down close to my face, and I could smell something awful, like seaweed and decay. Then she whispered something I'll never forget. "You're collecting them too, aren't you?" I woke up screaming, but the scream came out as barely a whisper. My throat felt raw, like I'd been screaming for hours. But here's the thing that still haunts me, I wasn't in bed. I was standing in the hallway, soaking wet, with seaweed tangled in my hair. My clothes were dripping salt water onto the floor, and sand was falling from my pajamas. I had no memory of leaving the bedroom, let alone going outside. The front door was wide open, and I could see my footprints in the sand leading from the beach straight to the house. But that's not even the worst part. Following my footprints in the sand were smaller ones, bare feet, just like in my dream. They led from the water to the house, then just stopped at the front door. I packed up and left that morning. When I told Sarah what happened, she got really quiet for a long time. Finally, she admitted that she'd been having the same dreams for years, but she'd never told anyone because it sounded insane. "The woman in white," she said. "She's been collecting dreams from people who stay in that house. My grandmother used to tell stories about her, said she was a woman who drowned off the coast in the 1800s, but she couldn't move on because she was still searching for her lost children. Apparently, the woman feeds off people's dreams, especially when they're going through emotional trauma. She uses the dreams to try to find what she's looking for, but she can never find it. So she keeps taking more and more dreams, and sometimes she pulls people into the dream world with her. Sarah told me that 3 people had gone missing from that house over the years. They were all found on the beach the next morning, but they were different. Empty. Like someone had scooped out their souls and left just the shells behind. I did some research when I got home, and sure enough, there were records of a woman named Margaret Thorne who drowned in 1847. She'd been looking for her 2 children who had been swept out to sea during a storm. Her body was never found. The really messed up part? I kept having the dreams even after I left the beach house. For weeks, I'd wake up with sand in my bed and the smell of seaweed in my room. The woman in white would be standing in the corner of my bedroom, just watching me with those hollow eyes. It finally stopped when I moved to a new apartment, but I still don't sleep well. Sometimes I wake up and find myself standing by the window, staring out at nothing. And I swear I can hear the ocean, even though I live hundreds of miles from the coast now. Sarah ended up selling the beach house last month. She said she couldn't handle the dreams anymore, and she was worried about what might happen to future guests. The new owners tore it down and built something modern in its place. But I wonder sometimes if that really stopped anything, or if Margaret is just waiting for the next person to come along, someone desperate enough, lonely enough, to let her into their dreams. I guess we'll never know. But if you ever find yourself staying at a beach house and you start having dreams about walking through endless rooms with a woman in white following you, my advice is simple: pack up and leave. Don't stick around to see what she's really collecting. This happened about 6 months ago when I was staying at my girlfriend Emma's family beach house down in Cape May. Her parents had offered to let us use it for a long weekend since they weren't planning to go down until later in the summer. Emma and I had been together for about a year at that point, and things were getting pretty serious, so her parents were cool with us having some alone time at their place. The house itself is nothing too fancy, but it's got character, you know? It's one of those classic shore houses that's been in the family forever, probably built in the 70s or 80s with that retro beach vibe. With paneling everywhere, nautical decorations, and windows that actually open instead of just being for show like in newer places. Emma's dad always jokes that the house has good bones even if the plumbing's a little temperamental. We drove down Friday afternoon and got there around 4. Emma immediately started giving me the grand tour even though I'd been there before during family gatherings. She showed me where everything was, reminded me about the quirky shower handle in the main bathroom, and warned me about the creaky floorboard near the kitchen that always scared her as a kid. We settled into the master bedroom since her parents said we could use it, and honestly it felt pretty grown up being there without the whole family around. That first night was perfect. We grilled some burgers on the deck, opened a bottle of wine, and just talked for hours while listening to the waves. Emma's always been a light sleeper, so she was worried about the ocean noise keeping her up, but I told her it would probably be relaxing once she got used to it. We went to bed around midnight and I fell asleep almost immediately. I've always been a pretty heavy sleeper and I rarely remember my dreams, but that night was different. I had this incredibly vivid dream where I was walking through the house, but it wasn't quite right. The layout was the same, but everything felt bigger and darker. I was looking for Emma, but I couldn't find her anywhere. Every room I checked was empty, and when I called her name, my voice just echoed back at me. The weirdest part was that I could hear her voice coming from somewhere in the house, but I couldn't figure out where. She sounded scared, like she was calling for help, but every time I followed the sound, it would seem to move to a different room. I kept walking through the same hallways over and over, getting more and more panicked because I couldn't reach her. Then I heard footsteps above me on the second floor. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that definitely weren't Emma's. In the dream, I was standing in the living room looking up at the ceiling, and I could track the footsteps as they moved from room to room. They stopped right above where I was standing, and I had this overwhelming feeling that whoever was up there was looking down at me through the floor. I woke up around 3 a.m. in a cold sweat. My heart was racing, and for a few seconds I wasn't sure where I was. Emma was still asleep next to me, breathing softly, so I figured the dream had just felt more real than usual. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My feet were dirty. Not just a little dusty, but actually dirty, like I'd been walking around outside. There was sand between my toes, and the sheets at the foot of the bed were gritty with more sand. I sat up and looked around the room, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The sliding door to the deck was open about 6 inches, and there was a small pile of sand on the carpet right in front of it. A trail of sandy footprints led from the door to the bed. My footprints. but I had no memory of getting up or going outside. I didn't want to wake Emma, so I quietly got up and went to the bathroom to wash my feet. That's when I noticed that my pajama pants were damp around the ankles like I'd been walking through wet sand. I cleaned up as best I could and went back to bed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. The next morning I mentioned it to Emma, casually asking if she'd heard me get up during the night. She said she hadn't heard anything and seemed genuinely confused when I told her about the sand. We both assumed I must have sleepwalked, which was weird because I'd never done that before, but stranger things have happened, right? That day we spent most of our time on the beach and everything felt normal again. We played volleyball with some other people, went for a swim, and just enjoyed being together. By evening I'd pretty much forgotten about the weird night before. We made dinner together and watched a movie on the couch until we were both too tired to keep our eyes open. But the second night was when things got really scary. I had the same dream again, but this time it was more intense. I was still walking through the house looking for Emma, but now I could see wet footprints on the floor ahead of me. They led from room to room like someone had been walking through the house with soaking wet feet. I followed the footprints up the stairs to the second floor, and that's when I heard Emma's voice again. She was crying and calling my name, but her voice was coming from outside. I ran to the window and looked down at the beach. Emma was standing in the surf about 50 feet from the house. She was in her pajamas and the waves were crashing around her knees. But here's the thing that still gives me chills. When I looked back at the bed, Emma was still there sleeping peacefully. I was seeing her in two places at once. The Emma on the beach was waving at me frantically like she was trying to get my attention, but when I tried to call out to her, no sound came out of my mouth. I woke up gasping and immediately looked over at Emma. She was right there next to me, still fast asleep. But my heart nearly stopped when I saw what was at the foot of the bed. There were wet sandy footprints leading from the sliding door to the bed, just like the night before. But this time there were two sets of prints. Mine and smaller ones that looked like Emma's. I shook her awake and she was groggy and confused. I asked her if she remembered having any dreams, and she said she dreamed about being at the beach but couldn't remember the details. When I showed her the footprints, she went completely pale. We spent the rest of the night sitting up in the living room with all the lights on, trying to figure out what was happening. Emma admitted that she'd been having strange dreams about the house since she was little, but she'd never told anyone because they seemed so real. She said she'd always felt like the house was trying to tell her something, but she could never figure out what. I'm not sure if that's enough to keep us safe. That's when she told me about her great-aunt Margaret, who had drowned off the coast near the house back in the 1960s. Apparently Margaret had been sleepwalking and somehow ended up in the ocean during a storm. Her body was found the next morning washed up on the beach right in front of the house. Emma's grandmother had always insisted that Margaret's spirit was still connected to the house and that she was trying to lead other family members to the water. It sounded crazy, but given what we'd been experiencing, it didn't seem so far-fetched anymore. We left the next morning and drove back home in silence. Emma called her dad a few days later and told him what had happened. He wasn't surprised at all. Apparently several family members had experienced similar things over the years, but nobody talked about it because it sounded insane. Her dad told us that Margaret had been a sleepwalker her whole life and that she'd been found wandering the beach several times before the night she drowned. He thinks her spirit is still sleepwalking somehow and that she's trying to get other people to join her. The really messed up part is that Emma started sleepwalking after that weekend. I've found her standing by windows in the middle of the night staring out at nothing. She doesn't remember any of it the next morning, but it's happening more and more frequently. We haven't been back to the beach house since then, and Emma's parents are thinking about selling it. But I wonder sometimes if distance really matters. If Margaret's spirit could reach out to us from miles away, what's to stop her from continuing to influence Emma no matter where we are? I've been having trouble sleeping lately too. Not sleepwalking, but weird dreams about walking through that house and hearing footsteps that aren't mine. Sometimes I wake up and find sand in our bed even though we live nowhere near the ocean. Emma says she can hear the waves at night even when we're in our apartment in the city. She started leaving wet footprints on the bathroom floor, and she has no memory of taking showers or baths. I'm scared that whatever happened to Margaret is slowly happening to Emma too. I don't know what to do about it. How do you fight something that can reach into your dreams and control your body while you're sleeping? How do you protect someone from a ghost that's been in their family for generations? All I know is that I'm never going back to that beach house, and I'm never letting Emma go back either. But I'm not sure if that's enough to keep us safe. This happened about 2 years ago when I was 24, and honestly, I still get chills thinking about it. I was going through a pretty rough patch at the time, just got laid off from my marketing job and was basically living paycheck to paycheck in this tiny studio apartment. My mental health wasn't great and I was spending way too much time scrolling through social media feeling sorry for myself. My college roommate Alex knew I was struggling, so when her family offered to let us use their beach house in the Hamptons for a long weekend, she thought it might help me get out of my funk. Alex's parents are both doctors and they've got this incredible property that's been in their family for like 30 years. It's not one of those massive mansions you see in movies, but it's definitely nice. 3 bedrooms, huge deck overlooking the dunes, and maybe a 5-minute walk to the beach. I wasn't really in the mood to socialize, but Alex can be pretty persuasive when she wants to be. She promised it would just be the two of us, no drama, just some time to decompress and figure out my next move. Plus I hadn't been anywhere in months, so I figured why not. We drove out Friday afternoon and got there around 6. The house smelled like that classic beach house combination of salt air and old wood that instantly made me feel more relaxed than I had in weeks. That first night was exactly what I needed. We ordered pizza, opened a bottle of wine, and spent hours catching up on everything. Alex has always been a good listener, and it felt amazing to actually talk to someone about how lost I'd been feeling. We stayed up until probably 2 a.m. just talking and laughing like we used to in college. I went to bed feeling hopeful for the first time in months. I've always been a pretty vivid dreamer, but that night was different. I dreamed I was swimming in the ocean, but it wasn't during the day like normal. It was pitch black outside and the water was surprisingly warm. I could hear Alex calling my name from the shore, but when I tried to swim back to her, the current kept pulling me further out. No matter how hard I swam, I couldn't get any closer to the beach. The weird part was that I wasn't panicking in the dream. Usually when I have anxiety dreams, I wake up with my heart racing, but this felt almost peaceful, like I was supposed to be out there in the dark water. I could see lights from the house getting smaller and smaller as I drifted further from shore, but I felt completely calm about it. I woke up around 4 a.m. feeling groggy and disoriented. My hair was damp with sweat and the sheets were twisted around my legs like I'd been moving around a lot in my sleep. I figured it was just because the room was warm, so I opened a window and went back to sleep. But when I woke up the next morning, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There was sand in the bed. Not just a little bit, but actual wet sand mixed in with the sheets near my feet. I sat up and looked around the room trying to figure out where it could have come from. The sliding door to the deck was closed and locked just like it had been when I went to bed. There was no way sand could have gotten in unless someone had tracked it in. I didn't mention it to Alex right away because I didn't want to seem paranoid. We spent the day on the beach and I kept thinking about the dream and the sand, but I convinced myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe I had sand on my feet from walking around the house earlier and just hadn't noticed. It seemed far-fetched, but it was better than the alternative. That night we decided to stay in again. Alex made dinner while I sat on the deck reading and just enjoying the sound of the waves. We went to bed around midnight and I was looking forward to another good night's sleep. But the dream came back, except this time it was more intense. I was swimming in the same dark water, but now I could see someone else out there with me. It was a woman about my age with long dark hair that floated around her like seaweed. She was swimming parallel to me, maybe 20 feet away, and every time I tried to get closer to her, she would disappear under the water. I called out to her, but she never answered. The strangest part was that I could breathe underwater in the dream. When I dove down to look for her, I could see perfectly and breathe normally like I was still on the surface. The ocean floor was covered in what looked like personal belongings, jewelry, clothes, shoes, all scattered around like they'd been dropped there over many years. I woke up gasping and immediately knew something was wrong. I was soaking wet from head to toe and my pajamas were clinging to my skin. The sheets were drenched and there was a puddle of water on the floor next to the bed. But it wasn't just water, it was salt water. I could taste it on my lips and smell the ocean scent filling the room. This time the sliding door was open about 6 inches and there was a trail of wet footprints leading from the door to the bed. My footprints. But I had absolutely no memory of getting up or going outside. The last thing I remembered was falling asleep and then the dream. I woke Alex up and she was immediately concerned. I showed her the water and the footprints and she went pale. She asked me if I had a history of sleepwalking and I told her no, never. We spent the rest of the night sitting in the living room with all the lights on trying to figure out what was happening. That's when Alex told me something that made my blood run cold. Her family had owned the beach house for 3 decades, but they'd never talked about why her great-aunt Caroline had stopped coming there in the 1990s. Apparently Caroline had been found one morning floating face down in the ocean about a quarter mile from the house. The official cause of death was accidental drowning, but Caroline had been an excellent swimmer her whole life. Alex's grandmother had always insisted that Caroline had been sleepwalking. She'd been going through a difficult divorce and had been having trouble sleeping for months before the incident. The family had found her wandering the beach at night several times that summer, but they thought it was just stress-related insomnia. After Caroline's death, several other family members reported having strange dreams about swimming in the ocean at night. Alex's cousin had been found sleepwalking toward the water twice during visits to the house. That's why most of the family had stopped coming there regularly. We left the next morning and drove back to the city in silence. I thought that would be the end of it, but the dreams continued even after I got home. For weeks I would wake up with damp hair and the taste of salt water in my mouth. Sometimes I'd find wet footprints on my apartment floor leading from the bathroom to my bedroom. I started researching Caroline's death and found some disturbing information. She wasn't the only person who had drowned in that area over the years. There were at least 6 other cases of people found in the ocean near Alex's family's beach house dating back to the 1970s. All of them had been staying in rental properties or visiting friends in the area. All of them had been found in the early morning hours floating in the same general location. The local newspaper articles mentioned that several of the victims had been found with no signs of struggle and had apparently entered the water voluntarily. One article quoted a witness who said they'd seen someone swimming in the ocean around 3 a.m. the night before one of the bodies was discovered. I called Alex and told her what I'd found. She admitted that her family had always known there was something wrong with that stretch of beach, but they'd never wanted to talk about it. Her parents had considered selling the house multiple times, but Caroline's death had made the property almost impossible to sell. The dreams finally stopped when I moved to a new apartment across town, but I still think about Caroline sometimes. I wonder if she's still out there in the dark water trying to find her way back to shore. Or maybe she's trying to bring others with her so she won't be alone. Alex's family ended up selling the beach house last year. The new owners tore it down and built something completely different in its place. But I still check the local news sometimes to see if anyone else has been found in the water near there. So far the drownings have stopped, but I can't shake the feeling that Caroline is still out there somewhere waiting for the right person to come along. Someone who's struggling and vulnerable like I was. Someone who might not fight the current when it starts pulling them away from shore. I've never been back to that beach and I don't plan to. Some places are just meant to be left alone.